This video is going to be looking at the Champions League matchup between Manchester City and Bayern Munich. Now this match ended with Manchester City winning 3-0, and we're going to look at how they did so and the tactics behind both teams. Before we get into the tactics, check out both my books. There's links in the description below, and check out Live Tag Pro. That's the program I'm using and I'll be using moving forward. It's a great program, it has a lot of functionalities that I really appreciate. I hope you guys like the high quality content. And as always, check out my new course in the description as well on tactics. So now let's get right into the analysis. So Manchester City built with their usual back three in possession. Now there's a few keys that I'm going to highlight with these three central defenders. First of all, their spacing in relation to the other team. So what I mean by this is they play on the outside shoulder of Bayern Munich's wide midfielders. This gives them direct passes into the half spaces and keeps a diagonal route to the wide areas for players to fan out or directly into their wingers. Now the next key piece will be their two holding midfielders. Now it's a really interesting one with their two holding midfielders here. So first off, with Rodri, we typically see him coming deeper, and we'll explain why in just a moment. So with Rodri coming deeper, this is usually because of the center forward pressing. So usually the player who's taken away by the cover shadow of the center forward is the determining factor for which player drops deeper. Now there's exceptions to every rule, but when he sees the center forward going to press using his cover shadow to block off the ball side holding midfielder, that's his cue to drop and get within access of a central defender and also his wide center back. This allows John Stones to play higher between the wide midfielder and the central midfielder, the number 10 of Bayern Munich. So this could create a 3 versus 1. They could access Rodri using a third man, or he could use double movements or dismarking strategies to avoid the cover shadow and directly get on the ball. Now usually it was Rodri for most of the game playing in this deeper role, and they had a lot of success with it. So not always did a Bayern Munich holding midfielder jump with him, but this is an added bonus from the City perspective, and this is usually due to the fact to keep compactness with his center forward and to read the situation. So when he would go and press, this was a good pressing scenario where they were able to force Manchester City backwards. But Manchester City also looked to stretch the defensive connections between their two holding midfielders. So with Joshua Kimmich going higher here and separating his connection to Goretzka, we have the situation they put the central defenders in. In this case, Upamecano jumps to Gundogan between the lines to avoid free players being found, and Goretzka takes the responsibility of Haaland. So these scenarios were very, very interesting to look at, and oftentimes Manchester City were able to avoid the cover shadow of the first line press, access their holding midfielders, and then find the half space on diagonal passes, Gundogan and Kevin De Bruyne. Now Bayern in possession were a little bit different. They went with a back four, and with Pavard playing on the right hand side, they were able to have a bit of asymmetry with this and change up from a back four and a back three. So their asymmetric back four gave them a few different options in possession. As we change the colors here, we can look at what this means for the midfield. So their midfield was driven by two holding midfielders and then Musiala playing as the number 10. Later in the game, and as the game moved on, we saw Musiala playing more of the left half space, but his positioning very intertwined with Goretzka jumping in this scenario in the left half space. And later on, as we'll see, Bayern Munich went with a midfield box that allowed them to have two number 10s in each half space and could potentially cause Manchester City problems. So now the biggest weakness and the biggest opportunity for Bayern Munich came within the half space. In this situation, it's Goretzka jumping further forward, and because of the compactness of Manchester City and the way they play, by having two holding midfielders that are very compact with their strong side wide midfielder or their ball side wide midfielder when the ball is circulating, it leaves the weak side half space or the left side half space free. Now Bernardo Silva would jump and try and cut off Alphonso Davies in the wide area with the two players, Kevin De Bruyne and Erling Haaland being responsible for controlling Joshua Kimmich and Goretzka when he would stay deeper. So in this left half space, Musiala and Goretzka had a lot of opportunity to receive diagonal passes from Upamecano or vertical passes from De Ligt. So these are big areas that we can look for in the second leg if Bayern can overcome a 3-0 deficit. I personally highly doubt it, but it could be an interesting one to look at, and the involvement of the weak side 10 against Manchester City, because we see this aggressive pressing structure with players pressing out to in, blocking wide areas, and leaving gaps in the half space for diagonal passes. And that's why Musiala's movement here and his positioning is so clever in the center, just in behind the two holding midfielders, because he's affecting the Manchester City two holding midfielders and opening up even more space for Goretzka when he jumps and into this diagonal position. Now we'll see a more typical back four with two wider fullbacks now from Bayern Munich. So in this situation, we have our back four and two holding midfielders. Goretzka stays deeper, and Musiala is the number 10 between the lines. Leroy Sané is then the player on the right side, just playing in the center, on the outside shoulder of the holding midfielder and the central defender. So this box created by the number 9 or whoever's taking up this position, dropping deeper to join the midfielders, could be potentially very dangerous against Manchester City because of the weak side half space and the space that's afforded, with the connection between the two holding midfielders becoming very narrow. It could be a good option for Bayern Munich moving forward and teams in the Premier League to take advantage of this. Now, Manchester City have a high level of compactness and are so well drilled in their defensive phase. Their distances are very good, but now we can look on the weak side half space and start to identify, how do we over exaggerate this area? How do we get Gundogan to come more to the ball side, attract with more first line passes to over exaggerate this space, and then find central defenders and skip diagonally if possible, if the players are drawn to the ball side enough. So we'll highlight the space here that we're talking about, and it's the connection between their left center back, their left back, their left midfielder, and their left central midfielder. Now this is the space that we saw Goretzka jump into on this left-hand side, but now it's on the weak side, the right-hand side, with the central striker moving closer to this half space with the winger staying wider. So the winger could pin Ake. The center striker could tempt the central defender to join him, with the winger coming from out to in, looking to try and exploit the jumping center back if he goes with him, play on that blind spot and outside shoulder of the holding midfielder. And we have our 2-6s looking to get these two players to jump into advanced positions, which will then free up the space for our weak side makeshift number 10, who's dropping from our center striker position, or our number 9. So now we're going to look at a key facet of Manchester City's game that Erling Haaland has improved greatly with his involvement and how he's been playing. So in the first half, we often saw Erling Haaland come between the two holding midfielders of Bayern Munich. So when Erling Haaland pops up in front of these two players and closes off the distance between him and his 2-6s, it's very hard to progress when Erling Haaland gets the ball as a target player. But when he receives the ball with his first touch behind these players, it gets their orientation completely off. They're facing the ball backwards, and gives a lot of freedom for players running off of him in the half space, like Kevin De Bruyne and Ilkay Gundogan, running off him for a layoff. And for a more safe route, we have our 2-6s to secure transitions, secure third man movements in a more vertical fashion, and offer more support going forward. So this was the key. When Bayern would go and press, we'd see them starting to man mark Rodri with the number 10 Musiala, and the forward pressing from out to in, pressing the central defenders outward, now leaving our free player John Stones. The space was created between holding midfielders by the number 10s of Manchester City to find this central passing route and connect the midfielders and take advantage of this man superiority that Man City were so good at creating throughout the match. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of the match and the analysis. I'll see you in the next one.